Welcome to the fourth part of our BlockPlay training resource. In this part we're going to be looking again at the role of the adult, but we're going to be looking at the adult's pedagogical knowledge and how they scaffold BlockPlay, about the importance of the role of observations within BlockPlay, and about how we talk with children about the structures that they are creating. So Tina Bruce says that rich block play doesn't just occur, it develops when an adult is working hard as a powerful catalyst to enable it. And we know that it's really important that adults have a role in setting up the block area, but what's of even more importance, I think, is the adult's pedagogical knowledge. And I hope that by now that you've worked through these previous training resources, that now that you have an understanding of the developmental stages of block play and of schemas in block play, you're starting to be able to use that pedagogical knowledge in your interactions with children. So I'm sure that most of you will have heard and seen this quote from Vygotsky about the zone of proximal development of the child. And he wrote that in play, a child always behaves beyond his average age, as though he were a head taller than himself. Play contains all developmental tendencies in a condensed form and is itself a major source of development. So we know that play is so important for children to learn, and block play is a wonderful, rich resource which enables children to learn in such a multitude of different ways. But the zone of proximal development is that point where children aren't quite doing something and need a little bit of support or scaffolding to take them on to that next stage. So it's really important that to unlock the benefits of block play, children need social interaction from adults as well as other children. So it's important that we are valuing children's own play with blocks. And it's important that we're not instructing children what to do with the blocks or giving them structures for them to copy. Instead, our role is really to sensitively interact with children and by carefully observing them, by really tuning in to the child's intentions, by actively listening and showing interest and respect for the children's constructions. And I think one of the things that's the most powerful is for you to be in the block area. By moving into the block area and being a regular presence there, you immediately tell children that block play is important to you and that this is a place where you want to hang out. And children will naturally orientate themselves to you and to the block area because they start to feel that there is something important about it. And I think it's through the kind of effective comments and questions that you ask that you can really help children to think deeply about their experiences with the blocks and with the other materials. And so through the effective observations that you're making, that will help you determine when to intervene and say something to support the children's learning, or when to take that little step back and just to observe and watch. It's really important that we are interacting but not interfering and shutting children's play down. And really the way that the adult responds can help children to make connections and to create meaning during their block play. One of the other things that's important is that children need support when they're returning the blocks and any accessories. So it's not just about saying, right, everybody tidy up. It's about doing it with them, returning the blocks and making it an enjoyable part of the block play. So the role of the adult in terms of observations is really, really important. The first job is really observing the children with intent. It gives us an opening into the child's world. What are they thinking about? What things are puzzling them? One of the times we had a little boy building we thought it was an airport. He was talking about aeroplanes, but his language wasn't good enough to really explain what it was he was talking about. He was saying something about it being closed, and we were asking him if he had been on holiday, but we weren't getting it quite right. When his granddad came to pick him up, we had a chat and said that he'd built this fantastic structure. And granddad said, oh, we were at the Museum of Flight at the weekend, and then the museum was closing. And we realised that what this boy had been building was his experience at the Museum of Flight. And the fact that it was closing was something that kind of had really bothered him. So through his block play, he was really exploring this idea of something being open and something being closed. We can see and observe the variety of academic skills and physical skills and social skills, cognitive skills that children are developing and how they're applying those skills. So just by observing, you can see whether children's fine motor skills are progressing, where they can balance very small blocks edge to edge with each other, or you can see whether they are able to negotiate with a play partner and to take turns within the play or share the resources. Through your really rich and focused observations, you will be able to see that children are learning in a completely holistic way and developing and progressing within their play. And through observation, we're really provided with opportunities to see the meanings that the child's created, the kind of ideas and questions with which they're struggling. So you might find children who are really interested in bridging, and they're really trying to problem solve how they can make a very long block balance on another block that's maybe a bit too far away and it keeps falling down, and they're really exploring and revisiting that idea and that question. Or it may be like our child with the Museum of Flight, that they're exploring things that are concerning them, or replaying the rich real life experiences that they've had. And we can also really observe at what developmental stage a child is playing. So knowledge of the stages, the 7 stages of block play, or the schema within play, gives you a really strong idea of where children are at. And these observations then provide the next steps in your planning by revealing how we might expand the children's learning and how we might kind of nudge them forward through asking open-ended questions or making statements about what you're seeing. I think it's really important when we're talking with children about their structures that we think about the stages of development that we're seeing, and also whether questions are what's appropriate or whether statements can be something that's more useful. So these kind of statements, that's a nice model, well done, oh, what have you built, are not very useful, particularly and if you are looking at the slides, you'll see for somebody who's maybe quite an inexperienced block player, and we know from our knowledge of the stages of block play that children are not really creating models that are specific until about stage 5, 6, 7. So saying what have you built to somebody who's investigating enclosures is going to draw a blank stare from them, because actually what they've built is a model, a structure, an exploration. They've not built something in particular. And I know I find myself going into the playroom and a child will say to me, Katrina, have a look what I've built. And it's really easy to say, oh, that's lovely, oh, that's a nice model, especially if you're busy and you're going on to do something else. And it's always really important to stop yourself and to come back and really engage in a much more meaningful and deep way. So these responses, which are not very useful, I'm now going to show you some responses to the same model that might be much more useful than questions. So you could focus on the choice of blocks. You might say, oh, I can see you've used a curved block, or oh, you've got a long straight one on top there. You might talk about the arrangement of the blocks. Oh, the blocks are on top of each other. Oh, the curved block is in the middle of the 2 straight blocks. Another kind of statement might be that you talk about the number used. Oh, you've balanced 3 blocks. Or I can see 2 straight blocks and 1 curved block. And in these kind of statements, you're really giving children lots of vocabulary and language to help describe their models. You could also talk about the similarity of the blocks. You might say, oh, these rectangular blocks are the same length. So you're helping children by pointing out different things that they might not have considered, but you're not shutting down the play by asking them or just saying that's nice, and not taking the play forward. Of course, questions are always useful, and giving lots of kind of open-ended questions we know help children to really kind of think. So lots of I wonder or I notice comments, or perhaps directing their attention to specific skills that they're developing can really be a good environment to help children create deeper understandings of their worlds. So we really are wanting to get that kind of sustained shared thinking going with children, that backwards forwards interaction, and really kind of guiding the child towards constructing further understandings about what it is that they're doing. So asking the kind of higher order open-ended questions can create a learning moment that facilitates a higher level of understanding, and that interaction can really promote further learning and thinking on the part of the child rather than you giving the child the answer. So lots of different ways we can ask questions. We might ask these open-ended questions. I wonder what would happen if. Oh, tell me about. How did you build your model? You might ask some questions about balance. Why doesn't your tower fall down? Oh, how could we use these blocks to make something really tall that doesn't fall down? So exploring with the children more deeply the concepts that they've been exploring. It might be questions around measurements if children are interested in that. And I think that's where the power of observation comes in. If you just come in and a child's building a model and you say, oh, let's count the number of blocks. More than often than not, the child's probably going to walk away fairly quickly because that's not what they're interested in. But if you see a child who's counting the blocks in their model, then going in and talking to them, oh, how many blocks have you got there? That's supporting the interest that they're displaying, and that will then extend the learning and the thinking. It might be that you look at structural questions, so perhaps the child's made an enclosure for an animal, for instance, and there might be a gap. You might say, oh, how can you make sure that the tiger doesn't escape? Or if they've built a house and there's no roof, you might say, gosh, I wonder what's going to happen if it rains, just to help children kind of think about the structure that they've created. Again, you might ask questions around shape and pattern, looking at turning shapes, how do they fit in, maybe continuing patterns. You might want to talk about estimating. Again, I think relating it to the observations that you're making and the interests of the children will make it much, much more profound. Also, you might think about questions about ramps, thinking about why things move down the ramp, which moves fastest, which moves slower. Is this ramp the same or different? And it can be very much a part of an exploratory backward and forward dialogue to help children think more deeply. And finally, we have our reflective questions. So using your observations or images of children who are playing with blocks, what stages of block play are you observing? And what statements or questions might you use to interact with that child or the children that are in that image or observation? And finally, what changes might you make to your provision to support deeper quality block play?